If you or someone you know has a pretty decent grasp of English, but they still don't sound proficient or they're still hard to understand, then erroneous speech sound production is probably why. The sounds of a given language are literally its building blocks. So if we want to master that language, then mastering those speech sounds is absolutely critical. Hello, language lovers, language learners, and intellectually curious folks everywhere. My name is Bakul Soman, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is the third in my series all about accents, and the focus of today's video is consonant sounds. English has 27 consonant sounds, or phonemes. A phoneme is essentially the smallest unit of sound that distinguishes one word from another. Let's make sure we take a moment to review this because this is critical. A phoneme essentially distinguishes one word from another. This means if you use the wrong sound, you could be saying a completely different word. For example, fun, bun, sun, run, fun, none, or but, bun, bud, bus, bug. In each of those cases, we're only changing one sound, but creating a whole different word. You get the idea. So it's absolutely critical that we are very clear on what phoneme is supposed to go in what word. So as we go through each of the sounds today, I want you to really pay attention and recognize that each of those sounds is absolutely distinct. So that sound cannot be interchanged with any other sound that we are reviewing today. Because if you do switch it with another sound, then you could be saying a completely different word. If English is not your native language, then I want you to pay particular attention to this, because there might be some sounds, as we review them today, that you will recognize, oh, in my language, I can interchange those two and it really doesn't change the meaning of the word, all right? But in English, it does. Each of these sounds is distinct and cannot be interchanged with any other sound. I know I said that a few times, but it's really that important. An example of this would be the B and the V in Spanish. It can be interchanged without changing the meaning, but you do that in English and you create a different word. One other thing to note is phonemes are always denoted between two forward slashes. So when you see a sound between two forward slashes, you know you're talking about the phoneme, the sound, not the alphabet, not the letter P, but the sound P, not the letter B, but the sound B, okay? It's not connected to any vowel. It's the pure sound, all right? So as we go through and you see letters in forward slashes, they're not letters, they are the sounds. And we're going to rely on our friend, the IPA again. No, not the kind you drink, the International Phonetic Alphabet. If you missed my video on vowels, I have a link in the description below. We did our first introduction to the IPA in that video, and we're going to use the symbols for consonant sounds in today's video. And yes, there will be a PDF that has all of this information neatly laid out for you. So make sure you take a look at the description and download that. It's a free PDF for you to refer to. The IPA is particularly important in English because it's not a very phonetic language. So the same sound can be created by a lot of different combinations of letters. So just looking at a word may not always tell you what sounds are in it. Once you are able to decode the IPA for it, then you will know exactly what sounds are being used to produce that word correctly. All right, so from a sound production perspective, what is a consonant sound? A consonant sound is a sound that is produced by shaping the airflow that is coming up through our lungs. We're using that airflow and we're using the articulators to shape that airflow to create a specific sound, okay? And what are the articulators that I'm talking about? So we're talking about the lips, we're talking about our teeth, we're talking about the alveolar ridge, which is it's kind of the gum line right above our teeth. So if you take a moment and put your tongue in the position that you would for the t or d sound, you're touching your alveolar ridge, that kind of bumpy area right above your front teeth or your top teeth. That's your alveolar ridge, and that is one of the articulators. We are also talking about our hard palate, which is kind of the roof of your mouth. And we're talking about the soft palate, which is a muscular area at the back of the hard palate. And that is, those are muscles. So they are able to move, to change the shape of our mouth, of our oral cavity. We're also talking about our glottis, which is the vocal mechanism in our larynx. So that would be the vocal folds, right? And the space between the vocal folds. Those together are kind of referred to as the glottis. So those are all the articulators that we are using to shape the sound. And how are we shaping that sound? We're shaping that sound by creating a constriction somewhere. All right? So the shape of our vocal cavity changes based on what articulator is touching what articulator. We're also using two cavities. We are using our oral cavity and we're using our nasal cavity. So there are some sounds in English that are produced through our nose, and most of the sounds are produced through our mouth. All right? So a consonant sound is produced by changing the shape of our oral and nasal cavity by using constriction, using a specific combination of articulators. Each language has its own set of phonemes. There might be a certain amount of overlap. There might be sounds that are common in a lot of languages, but typically each language will have a few sounds at least that are not that common, that are not present in a lot of other languages. Linguists believe that if we combine all the distinct phonemes in all the languages of the world, there are over 800 sounds. But any given language usually has between 30 to 50 sounds, and English is right in there with about 44 sounds. The language that has the most number of phonemes is the Ta language. It is spoken by a group of people in Botswana and Namibia, and it has over 100 consonant sounds and over 30 vowel sounds, and it has 5 different types of clicks. For those of us over a certain age, you guys might remember a movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy. And the language that the Bushman uses in that movie is, it's not Ta, I don't believe, but it's part of that language group with the clicks in it. If you would like to learn more about this fascinating and really, really challenging language, I have a link below in the description to a very cool video, so make sure you check it out. So what can make language learning challenging is the fact that each language has its own set of phonemes. As babies, we have this incredible ability to be able to hear any sound, any of those 800 plus sounds, right? Because a baby could just as easily be born in China, India, Botswana, Namibia, and it is able to pick up whatever language it is exposed to. So inherently, we have the ability to hear all 800 plus of these sounds. All right. But as we mature, starting right around age 1, our brain, in order to master the language that it is most exposed to, it kind of shuts down the ability to hear sounds that it doesn't really perceive being used in the language that it is immersed in. Okay. So in order to gain mastery over the dominant languages, we kind of lose the ability to hear those other sounds. So if you're learning a foreign language as an adult, you do have to deal with this challenge, right? That innately you may not be able to hear certain sounds that are present not in your language, but in the language that you're trying to learn. However, adults do have the benefit of having the cognitive ability to learn the mechanics of that sound and the acoustics of that sound and master those sounds that way. So all is not lost. Okay, so let's start breaking down the mechanics of the consonant sounds in English. When we talk about consonant sounds, there are 3 features that define a given consonant. The first one is voicing, the second one is place of articulation, and the third one is manner of articulation. In order to fully describe a sound, we need all 3 features. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and explain each characteristic and give you examples of what we mean by that specific characteristic, okay? But always recognize that each sound is defined by each of these 3 characteristics. And in the PDF below, there is a very nifty table that has all the consonant sounds in English, and it has all of these. Each sound is mapped by all three features, okay? And I will review it in the video, so when you download it, it will make a little bit more sense to you. So the first feature we're going to talk about is voicing. Voicing essentially means in order to produce that sound, your vocal cords are vibrating, okay? So vocal cords are essentially these two bands of muscles, right, that are attached here in your voice box, right? And they are vibrating to produce sound, okay? That's voicing. So let me demonstrate that. I want you to put your hands on your throat and just say, ah. And you're going to feel vibrations right over here in the middle of your throat, okay? So find that spot, ah, where you feel those vibrations. Now, just keep your fingers right there, and I want you to say the S and the Z sound alternated, okay? So, s, z, s, z, s, z. What do you notice? You should notice that when you say s, you don't feel the vibrations, and when you say z, you feel the vibrations, okay? So essentially, the S and the Z sounds are produced exactly the same way in terms of what we're using, where our tongue is going, all those pieces. What is different about them is whether your voice is turned on or off. So for S, we turn our voice off. For Z, we turn it on. So the S is considered an unvoiced sound, and the Z is considered a voiced sound. And what is happening when we say a sound that is not voiced? Your vocal folds just stay open and air just comes through it. There is no vibration, okay? They just stay open and the air just passes right through them. And so it's just air without any voicing. So here in this table, we can see pairs of sounds that they are essentially produced the same way. The only difference is whether your voice is on or it is off. And remember, voicing is a distinctive feature in English, which means if you switch a voiced sound and put in an unvoiced sound instead, or vice versa, you are creating a completely different word. And the pairs and the examples in this table illustrate that. Okay, so let's just quickly review them. B is a voiced sound. Back, pack, unvoiced. Few, v, view, voiced. Unvoiced. Thigh, part of our body. Thy, Shakespearean English for you. T, unvoiced, 10. D, voiced, den. S, sue, unvoiced, what lawyers do. Z, zoo, voiced, where you go to see animals. K, come. G, gum, like bubble gum. Okay, so as you will notice, you change the sound, you change the word. So voicing is a distinctive feature in English. So make sure you don't turn your voice on and off without thinking about it. Okay, so that's our first feature, voicing. The second feature we're going to discuss is the place of articulation, or where the voice is produced. Okay, so again, we're going to refer to those different articulators, those different parts of our mouth that we talked about earlier. So the first type of sounds that we're going to talk about are the bilabials. These are sounds that are made by using both our lips. Okay, so here are our bilabial sounds. B, bat, hat, mat, w, way. There is another sound here that is also considered a bilabial. That sound is almost disappearing in English, but I'm going to tell you about it because some people still use it, and I think you should be able to hear a difference, okay? So, w is a voiced sound. Hua is an unvoiced version of that. It's almost like an H and a W together. Hua, okay? So, hui as opposed to way, all right? So those are the bilabials. They use both lips to make that sound. Either the lips are together or both lips are rounded for the sound to be shaped appropriately. The next place of articulation is labiodental. So teeth and lips interact to create this sound. Okay, there are two sounds in English that are labiodental sounds, and you will see why they're called that. Right? Teeth interacting with the lower lip. Few, fan, voice is on, view, van. All right? So those are our labiodental sounds. The third place of articulation are inner dental sounds. And inner dental sounds, again, there are only two, and your tongue sticks out slightly between your teeth. Thigh, thank you, think, the, this, that, there, though. All right? Inner dental, tongue sticks out between your teeth just a little bit. These two sounds are not there in a lot of languages. Only about 8% of the world's languages have this sound in it. So pay attention to that one. The next group of sounds is actually the most common place of articulation. Okay, I think over 50% of the sounds fall in this category in terms of frequency of occurrence. Okay, these are called the alveolar sounds. Okay, so it's that bumpy ridge or gum line essentially right above our teeth. Okay, so here are the sounds that are alveolar. T, tap. So what you're doing is your tongue tip is tapping against that alveolar ridge to make that sound. Tap. Do, no, no, low, sun, zoo. And there is one other sound. I'm just going to mention it, but I'm actually going to do a whole video about it because it's an interesting sound, and there's certain conditions in which it is used. But let me just introduce it today. It is called a flap or a tap or a one-tap trill, okay? And this is the sound in words like city, butter, bitter, ladder, later, letter, okay? So it's that r, r, r sound. That is that one-tap trill or a flap or a tap. So if you will notice, we're moving kind of from the front of our mouth all the way to the back of our mouth. Now we're moving closer to the middle of the mouth, the roof of our mouth, the palate. These are called palatal sounds because our tongue, the constriction, the place of constriction is around that hard palate. Okay? So our first sound is sh, like sheep, show, shoe, shine, shh. The next sound is ch, ch, chew, chop, chicken. Very similar place of articulation. R, r, run, rain, rope. Same. The right tongue is right under the hard palate. There's actually a couple ways to make the R, but it's considered a palatal sound. Okay? The next sound that is actually not very common in English, it typically occurs in words that come from French, is j, like beige, rouge, okay? Actually, it's also in words like vision, so it is there in some words, but maybe that has a French root as well, not sure. Okay, so j sound like rouge, beige. J, j, jar, jump, Joe, jostle. And the last palatal sound that we will review is the y sound. Y, yes, yippee, yoke. All right, y. So these are sounds that are made by creating constriction around the hard palate. Moving farther back into our mouth, we are now going to talk about velar sounds. Okay, the velum is the soft palate, essentially. Okay, so velar sounds are created by the place of constriction. For velar sounds, it's farther back in that muscular part that is at the back of the roof of our mouth. And that muscular part ends in that little dangling uvula. So if you open your mouth and you see that little dangling thing in the back, that is the very tippy, end of our soft palate. Okay, so that velum area is where the constriction happens for these sounds. All right, so the first sound we're going to review is k, k, k. So what's happening is the tongue is going up to create constriction in the back of our mouth. So the soft palate and the back of the tongue are creating that constriction. Okay, k, cup, cup, can, cope, g, g, g. Same place of articulation, just our voice is on. G, go, gum, gate, game. So the next two sounds we are going to review, we actually already reviewed these two sounds as bilabial sounds, and these are the only two sounds that are placed in two separate places of articulation because two different things are happening to create those sounds. Okay, so the w sound and the hua sound that we talked about, they are considered bilabial because there's a lot of lip action going on, but there's also a lot of high tongue position in the back in that velar area, so they're also considered velar sounds. Okay, so that's why you're seeing those two sounds appear again under velar as place of articulation. Okay, wa, hua. All right, so labial, bilabial, and velar. And then the last place of articulation, even farther down, is our glottis, at the place of the vocal folds themselves. All right, two sounds. That is an unvoiced sound. The second sound that we're talking about is not really even a sound. It is kind of a pause, but that pause has some pressure that is built into it. Okay, so it is that little pause between between the and the o. There's a little pause there if you really pay attention. Or it is the T that is not produced in a word like Batman. Okay, Batman, bat, question mark, that glottal stop, Batman, or button, or kitten, or certain. Okay, so there's that little glottal stop in the middle there. So it's not really a sound as much as a pause, but that pause has a lot of tension built into it. So now we have reviewed voicing, which is a distinctive feature. So be careful, don't just turn your voice on and off without thinking about it. And we have talked about place of articulation, which is also a distinctive feature. So don't go switching a front sound for a back sound for a middle sound. You can't do that in English. The third feature we're going to talk about is manner of articulation, how the sound is produced. Different from place of articulation, which is where the sound is produced, where the constriction is. This is what are the characteristics of that sound in terms of the mechanics of producing that sound. So you are going to see a lot of the same sounds show up here as well, because remember what I said, each sound is characterized by all three of these, right? So each sound is going to have a voicing component, a place component, and a manner component, all right? So these are all sounds that you've already seen, but we're talking about them in terms of the manner of production now. And remember what I said, in the PDF that is linked, I have each sound mapped, or each sound is characterized by all three features. Okay, so at one glance, you can look at a sound and say, oh, this is a voiced bilabial stop. Okay, and you will know what a stop is in just a moment, because that is the first type of, or first manner of articulation that we are going to review. A stop is characterized by complete closure of the vocal tract, so that tension builds up right behind the place of constriction. Okay, so let's take an example. If you take the first stop listed on there, b, all right, think about what you're doing. You are literally there's no airflow. You're letting pressure, air is coming up through your lungs. You're letting pressure build up into your mouth, right behind your lips, because that is the place of constriction for a B, for a B sound. And then you let it out. There's like a little explosion. Right? So there's tension build up and a little explosion. B. All right? So there, the tension is built right behind your lips. The next two sounds are alveolar stops. Okay? So it's the same thing. There's complete closure of the vocal tract, but the tension is building behind the alveolar ridge. So, same thing. Full closure, tension builds up right behind that ridge, and then it comes out. So it's like a little mini explosion, okay? d. And then the third group of stops, or the third pair of stops, is our velar. So remember that velum, that soft palate, that is where the constriction is, and the pressure is building right behind that area. Okay, so these sounds are k, g. So it is a very small amount of time that you utilize to build that pressure, but you do feel it. So if you focus on it, you will feel that pressure building at that point. Okay, so those are our stops. So complete closure of the vocal tract, pressure builds right behind the place of constriction, which is determined by the place of articulation, which we've already talked about, whether it's lips or teeth or alveolars or palatals. All right. And then that pressure is released. Okay, so b, t, d, k, and that glottal b, that sound as well. So those are all our stops. The next group of sounds we're going to discuss in terms of manner are called fricatives. Okay, so when a fricative is produced, there is constriction, but it is not complete closure like for our stops. Okay, so it is almost complete closure, but there's a little gap and there's a constant flow of air through that gap that causes like a hissing sound. And those are our fricatives. Here are all the fricatives in English. Okay, there is closure, but air is constantly flowing, creating that friction and making that hissing sound. Tingles. All right, all of those are our fricatives. The next group of sounds are called nasals. And as the name suggests, these are the sounds in English that are produced through our nasal cavity. What happens when we're producing a nasal sound is that our soft palate closes off the oral cavity. Okay, so as the air is coming up through our lungs, it cannot enter the oral cavity. It goes into our nose and comes out through our nose. Okay, so the three sounds in English that are nasals that are produced by closing the oral cavity and opening and keeping the nasal cavity open are okay, try saying that with your nose closed. You can't, because the air cannot exit your nose to make that sound. Okay, so and ing, like the last sound in a word like sing or wing or ring. Okay, that ing sound, which is a distinct sound in English. Okay, it's not a distinct letter of the alphabet, but it is a distinct sound. All right, so three nasals, ing. All right. When you have a cold, a lot of people erroneously say, oh, she was so nasally because she had a cold. No, if you have a cold, your nasal cavity is blocked. So actually you have a denasalized voice. So moon sounds like booed, right? You're producing them through your mouth instead of through your nose. But a lot of people say, oh, it sounded so nasally, she had a cold. No, it is actually the opposite of that. The next group of sounds that we are going to talk about are called liquids. Liquids are kind of vowel-like. Okay, there's a lot less constriction in our vocal mechanism when we make these sounds. Okay, there are two liquids in English, l and r. All right, l, r. Less constriction. The next group of sounds in terms of manner are called glides. And glides are sometimes called semi-vowels, okay, because they have a lot of vowel-like characteristics, but they act like consonants. They cannot be the nucleus of a syllable like a vowel. A vowel has to be the nucleus of a syllable. These glides cannot be, but they are like vowels, and a lot of times they kind of blend right into the vowel that comes before or after it. The three glides in English are ya, like yes, okay, There's also a lot more tongue movement or articulator movement when we say those sounds. Yeah, okay, you can feel your tongue moving. Wah, wah, all right, a lot more movement in that sound as well. And of course, that third sound that I said is not used very often in English these days, but some people, some dialects still use it. Wah, wah, okay, that's also called a glide. The last group in terms of manner of articulation are affricates. Affricates are actually a combination of a stop and a fricative. So you start with a stop and end with a fricative. There are two sounds in English that are called affricates. One is the ch sound, and if you even look at the phonetic symbol, the IPA symbol for the ch sound, it has a T and that kind of squiggly line next to it. So it has the T as a stop, and the squiggly line is the IPA symbol for sh. All right. So the ch sound is a combination of t and sh together. Okay. So if you really pay attention, you will notice that you're making both those sounds in very quick succession. Ch, ch. And same for the second affricate, which is j. Okay. It has the d as the stop and j as your fricative, like rouge, okay? J, like Jamaica, pajamas, jam, jelly, okay? And ch would be chew, chicken, chow mein, all right? So stop followed by a fricative. All right, that was a lot. That was a lot. We talked about voicing. We talked about place of articulation, which is where the constriction is happening. And we talked about the manner of articulation, the mechanics of the sound, right? Is there complete closure? Is there partial closure with constant airflow? What's happening? All right. So as promised, the PDF has all this information in it, right? It has a table. Actually, I'm going to review that table with you just so when you look at it, you will know how to interpret it. Okay, so this is the table, and so the column in purple is manner, right? So the mechanics of how the sound is produced. The column in turquoise, I guess, is voicing, and across the top horizontally is place. Okay, so each of these bilabial, labiodental, interdental, alveolar, palatal, velar, glottal, they all refer to the place of articulation. So the way to read this table would be, let's look at the first row under bilabial, it says b, bat, okay? So you will also notice that voice has the number 1 next to it, place has the number 2 next to it, and manner has the number 3 next to it. So when we describe a sound, we do it in that order. So if I were to describe this b sound, I'm going to call it a voiced, okay? If there's a plus in the column under voice, that means voice is on. If there's a minus, that means voice is off, okay? So for the b, voice is on. So I'm going to call it a voiced, okay? Number 1, we first start with voicing. A voiced place is bilabial. It is a voiced bilabial stop, okay? If we look at the v sound, the v sound down here, it is a voiced labiodental fricative. Okay, so that's how a sound will be described. All right, so now when you look at the PDF, it should make more sense to you. But if it doesn't, you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to clarify. All right, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something interesting. And remember, even though we may not be able to hear some of these sounds as adults, we have the cognitive ability to master them, understanding the mechanics and the characteristics of these sounds, okay? So we can learn to make these sounds. As always, thank you for joining me. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next week.